Welcome back to Dieu Han RV. I hope you're safe, healthy, and surrounded by kind people today. Tell me, where are you watching from? Is it morning, afternoon, or night where you are? Wherever you are, thank you for joining this quiet journey. In today's story, Dieu Han wakes up with someone on her mind, an old friend who once shared her pain. And sometimes, the smallest memory is enough to make us act. Have you ever missed someone so suddenly? This morning, Dieu Han remembered Yen, her friend from long ago, whose fate still haunted her heart. They hadn't seen each other in so long, but memories don't fade just because time moves forward. Today, Dieu Han wanted to bring a little gift to Yen. Nothing fancy, just something warm from the countryside. A gesture of care. Have you ever given someone a gift just because you missed them? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's a man in Dieu Han's village who grows the biggest, softest avocados she's ever seen. This morning, she asked if she could pick some to give to her friend. He smiled and said yes. So before the sun rose high, she gently dropped Tom off at a trusted relative's home. With a kiss on his cheek and a promise to return soon, she turned to the hills, basket in hand. Have you ever prepared a gift with your own hands for someone dear? With each step through the dewy path, Dieu Han thought of Yen. Were her days calm now? Was she still carrying fear? Life had kept them apart, but maybe this small gift could be a way to reach across the distance. Sometimes, we don't need grand gestures, just presence, just effort. What's the simplest thing someone's ever done that touched your heart? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, please like, share this video, and subscribe to follow more of Dieu Han's journey. Tom didn't say much that morning. He simply held Dieu Han's hand tightly as they walked to the small wooden gate. When the door opened, his eyes lit up, and he gently ran toward the woman standing there. He hugged her naturally, as if it had always been his second home. Dieu Han stood still for a moment, watching that quiet embrace, her heart aching with both pride and sadness. Her son had learned to adapt, even when she wished he didn't have to. There was comfort in knowing that Tom felt safe there. He didn't cry, didn't cling to her like most children would. He looked back once, waved with a soft smile, then disappeared inside. Dieu Han lingered at the gate longer than necessary. Every parting was a reminder of the weight she carried alone. She wanted to believe she was doing well, but some mornings like this made her question whether strength and loneliness were just two sides of the same coin. She pulled out her phone, hands slightly trembling. Her thumb hovered over Yen's contact, hesitant but full of longing. It had been so long. Too long. The screen glowed as she pressed call. Her heart pounded in her chest like it remembered things her mind was still too afraid to name. The first ring was silence. The second was fear. Then suddenly, a voice familiar and changed broke through. The sound of Yen's voice felt like a door opening in the middle of winter. It wasn't just a voice. It was a memory, a warmth, a place she had buried too deep. Dieu Han's lips parted, but no words came out at first. Her breath caught. All the years of separation, of not knowing, of pretending not to miss her friend, came rushing back in a single breath. And in that moment, she was no longer alone. She finally spoke, her voice shaky but real. She asked if Yen was all right, if life had been gentler lately. Her own words surprised her. They carried so much weight. Dieu Han hadn't realized how much she still cared, how much of her heart still remembered. She had called to give a gift, a thanks, but found herself needing something to not pity, not help. Just a thread, a bridge, a sign that they still existed in each other's world. She told Yen about the avocado farm. How she thought of her when she saw the trees, heavy with fruit. It reminded her of the days when they shared quiet meals, stories under dim lights, and hopes neither dared speak out loud. Picking avocados might seem small, but to Dieu Han, it was a way to return something that had been given in silence. Love, shelter. The kind that asked for nothing but was never forgotten. In her voice was something soft and sacred, a quiet apology for time lost, and a quiet gratitude for time still left. The call wasn't long, but it left her lighter. And in that moment, Standing by the roadside with her phone pressed to her chest, Dieu Han realized something. No gift is too small when it comes from a place of love. And no distance is too great when hearts are still quietly reaching for one another. Dieu Han arrived at the avocado orchard just as the sun began to climb. This was the place she'd come to many times, both to earn a living and to find a quiet moment away from the chaos. The trees stood tall and full, their branches heavy with fruit. She walked slowly between the rows, her eyes scanning for the best ones. Today wasn't just about selling. It was about giving. And she wanted to give Yan the very best she could offer. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, testing each avocado gently, feeling their weight and softness. She picked only the ones that felt perfect, large, smooth, rich in color. The thought of Yan unwrapping these little gifts warmed her chest. There was something healing in preparing a gift with your own hands. A silent way of saying, I haven't forgotten. You mattered. You still do. And even if we're far apart, I remember how you once made me feel safe. The sun beat gently through the branches as she reached higher, standing on her tiptoes. A few of the biggest avocados hung just out of reach. Without thinking, Dieu Han grabbed onto a sturdy branch and began to climb. The bark scraped her skin, and her arms trembled slightly, but she pushed through. She had done this before, many times. But today, her body felt heavier. The sickness still lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake off. Midway up the tree, her breath grew shorter. A sudden wave of dizziness made her grip tighten. She paused, clutching the branch, willing the world to stop spinning. Her chest tightened, and a cough burst from her lungs, sharp and dry. Dieu Han pressed her forehead against the tree bark, eyes shut, trying to steady herself. Her body was reminding her it hadn't healed yet. But her heart whispered, just a little more, for someone who once gave you everything. Slowly, she gathered her strength and moved again, reaching for the largest fruit. Her fingers closed on it, and with a firm twist, it came free. She smiled faintly, breathless, as if she had just reclaimed something more than a fruit, something like courage or memory. Climbing down was harder. Her legs trembled, and her back ached. But the avocado in her hand gave her focus. A gift with meaning always costs more than it seems. Once on the ground, Dieu Han sat in the shade for a moment, wiping sweat from her brow. Her breathing was uneven, and another cough escaped her lips. But she looked at the basket beside her full of avocados, all handpicked with care. She imagined Yan's face receiving them. And for a brief second, the pain in her body softened. What she was doing may seem small, but to her, it was a bridge. A way back to someone she still held dear. She slowly stood, brushing the dust from her clothes. The sun had climbed higher now, lighting the orchard in gold. Dieu Han picked up the basket and held it close, the weight of the fruit grounding her. Her legs ached, but her resolve had never felt stronger. She would bring these to Yan. Not because she had to, but because it meant something. A gift for a friend who had once opened her door when the world had shut Dieu Han out. Dieu Han adjusted the basket on her hip and started walking toward the nearest delivery stop. The path was long and dusty, and her legs already felt like they were made of lead. But in her heart burned a quiet fire. This delivery was important. It wasn't just fruit. It was a thank you. A way to honor Yan, who had once given her a place to rest and the freedom to search for her father without worry. The sun grew hotter, and her pace slowed. Sweat rolled down her temples, and her vision blurred slightly. Every few steps, she had to pause and catch her breath. Still, she didn't turn back. Yan had been there for her in ways no one else had. When the world seemed to close every door, Yan had opened one. Now, even if it meant pushing past her limits, Dieu Han was determined to return that kindness. Her legs wobbled as she reached a bend in the road. The weight of the basket, the heat, and the exhaustion from climbing earlier caught up with her. A sudden wave of dizziness hit, forcing her to crouch down, hands gripping her knees. Her breathing was shallow, her chest tight. She blinked fast, trying to stop the world from spinning. Her thoughts jumbled, and for the first time that day, she felt truly fragile, truly alone. Just as she tried to stand again, a familiar voice called out from behind. "DANH." He pulled over quickly, concern written all over his face. He jumped off his motorbike and rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" His voice was gentle, but urgent. Dieu Han looked up, startled. It felt surreal. How did he find her, just when she needed someone most? Her lips trembled, not knowing whether to cry or smile. Dan knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her back. He could feel the heat from her skin, then even rise of her chest. Without hesitation, he placed a hand on her forehead. It was warm to warm. "You have a fever," he said, more to himself than to her. His brows furrowed, and worry filled his voice. He wanted to take her to a hospital immediately. But Dieu Han had other priorities. "I need to send these to Yen, please. Just help me get to the bus stop." Her voice was hoarse but firm. Dan hesitated. Every instinct in him screamed to take her to safety. But looking at her eyes, filled with purpose and quiet fire, he knew better than to argue. He nodded slowly, then took the basket from her hands and placed it on his bike. "I'll take you there," he said softly. "Let's go." She climbed onto the back of his bike, leaning slightly against him for support. As the engine hummed beneath them, the wind began to soothe her burning cheeks. The road blurred past, but Dieu Han could only focus on the warmth at her back, the quiet strength of someone who chose to stay. For so long, she had carried every burden alone. This moment, though brief, reminded her what it felt like to not be alone anymore. Dan didn't say much as he drove. He simply glanced back now and then, making sure she was still upright, still breathing steady. His silence wasn't cold, it was full of care. When they reached the delivery point, he parked gently and helped her down. "Are you okay?" he asked again. This time, Dieu Han nodded. Her strength hadn't returned, but in his presence, her fear had lessened. That alone was worth something. With trembling hands, she handed the basket over to the delivery clerk. The woman nodded and tagged the box with Yen's name. Dieu Han exhaled, a weight lifting from her chest. It was done. She had kept her promise. Her vision blurred again, but not from dizziness this time, from the swell of emotion pressing behind her eyes. Behind her, Dan was still waiting. Somehow, that meant more than any words he could have said. As they walked back to the bike, Dan offered her his arm. Dieu Han hesitated only for a second before accepting. The contact was brief, but it steadied her. For all her strength, all her independence, sometimes what she needed most was simply someone who cared enough to show up. Not fix everything, just be there. And today, when her body was weak and her heart was tired, Dan was exactly that. As Dan started the engine, Dieu Han remained quiet, her hands resting on her lap. A part of her wanted to lean back again, to let herself rest just a little longer. Was it comfort? Or something deeper? The road home stretched ahead, but in her heart, new questions stirred. Could this be the beginning of something else? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Maybe it was just kindness. Maybe it was fate. But the way Dan looked at her, gentle, concerned, it lingered in her thoughts long after they drove away. Would you trust your heart again after so much pain? Dieu Han might. Or she might not. But one thing is certain, when someone shows up in your weakest moment, it changes everything. What if that's how love begins? Like, share, and subscribe to follow what happens next.